I stand before you today with a message of hope, a message of peace, and most importantly, a message of faith. We live in a world that often tells us to worry. Worry about our future, worry about our finances, worry about our health, worry about our relationships. The world insists that we carry these burdens as if it's our responsibility to figure everything out alone. But I am here to tell you today, do not worry. God will solve it. I want you to pause for a moment and reflect on the power of faith. Faith is not just a belief. It is a force that moves mountains, that shifts realities, that aligns us with a higher purpose. When we trust in God, we open the door for the impossible to become possible. We stop relying solely on our own understanding and begin to tap into the infinite wisdom of a creator who knows the end from the beginning. You see, we often believe we can control every part of our lives. We strive for control over situations, outcomes, and people. But life has a way of reminding us that we are not in control. There are forces bigger than us, situations beyond our power, and circumstances that we cannot change, no matter how hard we try. This is not a cause for panic, but a call for surrender. When we surrender our worries and our need for control to God, we invite Him to step in and work on our behalf. Worry is a thief. It steals our peace, our joy, and our clarity. It distracts us from the solutions God is already bringing into our lives. When you worry, you're giving more power to your problems than to your faith. And let me be clear, worry is not a spiritual ally. It is a spiritual enemy. The more we worry, the less we trust. The less we trust, the less we open ourselves to receive the solutions that God is waiting to deliver. God's timing is perfect, my friends. I know many of us become impatient when things don't happen the way we want them to, or when we don't see results immediately. But let me remind you, God sees the bigger picture. He is never late, and He is never early. His solutions come at the right time, even if that timing doesn't align with our own. Trust that His timing is part of His greater plan for you. And let me tell you this, God has already made a promise to you. He will provide for your every need. In Matthew 6:26, it says, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? If God cares for the birds, how much more will He care for you? Worry does not change your circumstances, but trust in God changes everything. And here's the most important truth I want you to remember. You are not alone. In every trial, in every challenge, in every uncertain moment, God is with you. He walks beside you, guiding you, strengthening you. The Bible says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. When you feel like you're facing the storm alone, remember that God is your refuge and strength. He has never and will never abandon you. But there's something we must understand. God works in partnership with us. While we are not called to worry, we are also not called to be passive. Faith without action is dead. God does not call us to sit idly by and wait for Him to solve everything for us. He calls us to move in faith, to take steps in the direction He is guiding us, and to trust that as we act, He will intervene and make the way clear. You may not have all the answers, but you have enough faith to take the next step, and that's all God needs. Finally, when we let go of our worries and place our trust fully in God, we experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. This peace is not based on our circumstances. It is rooted in the assurance that God is in control and that He will solve what we cannot. This peace guards our hearts and minds, even when the world around us is in turmoil. It is the kind of peace that lets us sleep at night and face each new day with hope and confidence. So today, I encourage you, do not worry. Whatever it is that you're facing, know that God is already working on it. He will solve it. He will provide for it. He will guide you through it. Trust in Him with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, and He will make your path straight. Remember, God is bigger than any problem you will ever face, and He is more than able to deliver you from anything that comes your way. Faith is the fundamental cornerstone upon which our lives should be built. It is not merely a belief, but a powerful force that shapes our reality. When we operate in faith, we unlock the ability to navigate the unknown with confidence, to face obstacles with courage, and to trust that there is a purpose even in the midst of trials. Faith is not a passive act. It's a living, active force that propels us to take steps into the unseen, to believe in what is not yet visible, and to know that what we hope for will come to pass. Too often we confine faith to a small box, limiting it to moments of prayer or crises. But faith is far more than a response to desperate situations. It's a daily choice, a constant reminder that there is a higher plan at work in our lives. Faith allows us to see beyond our immediate circumstances. It invites us to rise above our fears and anxieties and trust that God is already working on the solution even before we can comprehend how. The true power of faith is in its ability to change our perspective. When we trust in God, our outlook shifts. We move from a place of fear and doubt to a place of peace and assurance. We may not have all the answers, but we know that our steps are guided by a higher wisdom and that all things are working together for our good. Faith reassures us that we do not have to have control over every detail. It frees us from the burden of thinking we must solve everything ourselves. In the face of difficulties, faith provides us with strength to endure. When we stand in faith, we are not relying on our own strength or understanding, but on the power of God working within us. It's this divine strength that empowers us to keep moving forward, even when the road ahead seems unclear. The beauty of faith is that it doesn't ask us to have everything figured out. Faith simply asks for trust. Trust that God knows the way. Trust that He has already gone before us, preparing the path. Trust that He has our best interests in mind, and that He's not just solving our problems, but using every situation to build us into the people He has called us to be. When we step into faith, we step into a world of possibilities that are far beyond our limited view. Faith opens doors that were once closed, and it lights the way through the darkest tunnels. It tells us that no matter how impossible things may seem, there is always a solution with God. In essence, faith is not just a passive belief, but an active power that moves mountains, changes lives, and transforms our circumstances. When we trust God with everything, our struggles, our dreams, our hopes, we create space for His greatness to be revealed in our lives. It is through faith that we can truly begin to experience the abundance of His promises and walk boldly in the direction He is calling us to. We often find ourselves grasping for control in every area of our lives, from the smallest details to the most significant decisions. We convince ourselves that control is the key to our success, happiness, and security. But in reality, the illusion of control is just that, an illusion. We can plan, strategize, and prepare all we want, but there are always forces beyond our control. Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges, surprises, and twists our way, reminding us that no matter how much we try to manage, we cannot control everything. The illusion of control keeps us tethered to a false sense of security. We become obsessed with managing every outcome, monitoring every detail, and predicting every possibility. But this kind of control doesn't bring peace. In fact, it often leads to anxiety and stress. When things inevitably go awry, as they often do, we find ourselves overwhelmed and frustrated. We may wonder why things didn't go according to our plan, or worse, why things didn't turn out the way we thought they should. But it's important to understand that the need for control stems from a place of fear. The fear of the unknown, the fear of failure, the fear of uncertainty. When we try to hold tightly to control, we are in effect fighting against the flow of life. We're resisting the natural course of events, believing that our effort will somehow make everything fall into place. But in doing so, we often miss the bigger picture, the unfolding of God's plan in our lives. The more we try to control things, the more we may actually be preventing the very blessings and breakthroughs we desire. We shut ourselves off from trusting in a higher power, thinking that we alone are responsible for every outcome. True peace comes when we release our grip on control. It doesn't mean that we abandon responsibility or cease taking action. It means acknowledging that there are things beyond our reach. By letting go of the need to control every aspect of our lives, we make room for faith to take its place. Trusting in God allows us to surrender our desire to micromanage the universe and to accept that there is a plan greater than ours. We may not always understand why things happen the way they do, but faith helps us realize that it's not always about understanding. It's about trusting that God is at work, even when we can't see it. Illusion of control also causes us to take on burdens that were never meant to be ours. We become weary from carrying the weight of trying to make everything work perfectly. And in the process, we often neglect the one thing that can bring true relief: faith in God. When we stop trying to control everything, we start to see that we are not meant to handle it all alone. There is a higher power at work that is far more capable of solving our problems than we could ever be. The truth is, life doesn't need to be managed down to the smallest detail. It needs to be lived in faith, in the knowledge that we can step forward into the unknown with the confidence that God will provide, guide, and protect us. We must learn to release control and trust that the very thing we are trying to hold on to is often the thing that is preventing us from experiencing peace. Once we surrender the illusion of control, we open ourselves to the greater possibilities that God has prepared for us. Worry is a silent thief that creeps into our minds, robbing us of peace and distracting us from the life God intends for us. It's more than just a mental habit. Worry is a spiritual enemy that stands in opposition to our faith, and it actively works to weaken our trust in God's ability to care for us. The moment we begin to worry, we are aligning ourselves with fear rather than faith. It causes us to focus on the problems and challenges in front of us, often magnifying them to the point where they seem insurmountable. Worry clouds our judgment, distorts our perspective, and strips us of the strength we need to face life's challenges with confidence. When we worry, we essentially admit in that moment that we do not trust God's promises. The Bible reminds us repeatedly not to be anxious or fearful, yet worry seems to creep in regardless. We have a tendency to allow worry to consume us, to allow it to dictate how we feel and how we respond to situations. Worry breeds fear, and fear paralyzes us. It keeps us from moving forward, from taking action, and from fully embracing the plans God has for us. It locks us in a cycle of overthinking and imagining worst-case scenarios that most often never come to pass. Worry is also a subtle form of self-reliance. When we worry, we are essentially saying that we must solve everything on our own, that we are the ones responsible for the outcome of every situation. But God is clear. Our role is not to worry, but to trust. When we let worry take root, we forget that we are not in this alone. We are not meant to carry every burden by ourselves. God is with us, and he wants us to bring our concerns to him, to trust him with our fears, and to rely on his wisdom and provision. Worry disrupts our spiritual connection with God. When we are consumed by worry, we lose sight of the fact that he is in control. Worry leads us to believe that God either doesn't care or is not capable of handling our situations. This is a dangerous lie. The truth is that God is more than capable of providing for every need, guiding us through every storm, and offering solutions far beyond our limited understanding. Worry robs us of the opportunity to hear his voice, to experience his peace, and to trust in his timing. In fact, worry is an enemy to our peace. It displaces the calm that comes with faith and replaces it with unease. The Apostle Paul encourages us in Philippians 4:6-7 to be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And then the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard our hearts and minds. Worry stands in direct opposition to this peace. While worry floods our hearts with anxiety, faith fills our hearts with tranquility. When we choose to give up worry and instead trust God, we invite his peace to reign in our lives. Worry also prevents us from being effective in the present. When we are consumed with thoughts of what might happen in the future, we are unable to fully engage with the present moment. Our minds are distracted, and our hearts are unsettled. We miss out on opportunities to act in faith, to see the blessings God has for us in the here and now, and to fulfill the purpose he has set before us. Worry, at its core, is a thief. It steals joy, it steals peace, and it steals our ability to walk confidently in the direction God is calling us. The good news is that we have the power to overcome it. We can choose not to give in to the lies that worry tells us. We can replace anxiety with trust and fear with faith. Every time worry tries to creep in, we can remind ourselves of the promises of God, that he will never leave us, he will always provide for us, and he will take care of all that concerns us. When we stand firm in this truth, we disarm worry and render it powerless. Worry is not just a thought process. It's a spiritual battle. The enemy wants us to stay stuck in fear, to remain in a place where we doubt God's goodness and provision. But God calls us to a different way of living. He calls us to walk by faith, to trust in his ability to provide and protect, and to cast all our cares on him. When we do this, we reclaim the peace that rightfully belongs to us and experience the fullness of life that God has promised. God's timing is a concept that we often struggle to grasp, especially when we are in the midst of challenging situations or waiting for answers. In our human nature, we tend to measure time by our own standards. Immediate, quick, now. We want things to happen according to our plan, on our schedule, in the way we envision. But God's timing operates on an entirely different level. It transcends our limited understanding, and it is always, without fail, perfect. We live in a world that values instant gratification. From technology to food delivery, we are accustomed to getting what we want when we want it. But this quick pace of life can sometimes interfere with our understanding of how God works. We may think that when things don't happen in the way or at the time we expect, God is somehow absent or that he has forgotten about us. However, this could not be further from the truth. God's timing is not based on our calendar or our urgency. His timing is perfectly aligned with his plan for us. And his plan is always good, even when we don't immediately see how it will unfold. One of the reasons God's timing is so perfect is because he sees the bigger picture. We can only see what is in front of us, and our perspective is limited by our circumstances and our understanding. God, however, sees the past, present, and future. He knows what is ahead and what we need to experience in order to grow, to develop, and to be positioned in the right place at the right time. Often we think we know what is best for us, but God knows exactly what we need and when we need it. His perfect timing ensures that we are prepared for what lies ahead, even if we don't fully understand why certain things are happening in the moment. There are times in life when we find ourselves in seasons of waiting. We wait for opportunities, for healing, for answers, for breakthroughs. During these times, it can be easy to become frustrated or disheartened. We may wonder why things aren't happening as we hoped, or why our prayers seem unanswered. But it is during these times that God is working behind the scenes. He is preparing us, refining us, and positioning us for what is to come. Waiting is not a passive experience. It is an active process of trust, where we must choose to believe that God is at work even when we cannot see the immediate results. God's perfect timing is also tied to his understanding of our hearts. He knows the desires of our hearts, but he also knows the state of our hearts. Sometimes we are not ready for what we are asking for. We may pray for things that in the moment we think we need, but God knows that we are not yet equipped to handle them. In his perfect timing, he ensures that we are spiritually, emotionally, and mentally prepared for the gift he has in store for us. He will not give us something too soon because he understands that it would not serve us in the way that he intends. God's timing is perfect because it is always aligned with his purpose. We may not always see how certain events or delays are connected, but God's plan is far greater than our own. He is orchestrating every detail of our lives in perfect harmony with his ultimate purpose for us. Every delay, every closed door, every no from God is not a setback, but a step toward his greater plan. Trusting in God's timing means believing that even when things seem delayed or difficult, he is still at work in our lives. And his plan is better than anything we could ever envision. There are moments when God's timing can be particularly challenging to trust, especially when we feel that time is running out or that opportunities are slipping away. In those moments, we must remember that God is not bound by time as we are. He does not operate in the same way we do, and he is not subject to deadlines. What seems late to us is never late to God. He is always on time, and his perfect timing is a reflection of his love for us. He knows the exact moment when the right opportunity will come, the right person will enter our lives, the right breakthrough will happen, and the right answer will arrive. When we allow ourselves to trust in God's perfect timing, we experience peace. We let go of the need to control our circumstances and embrace the truth that God is in charge. We are freed from the pressure of trying to make things happen on our own timeline, and instead we rest in the assurance that God is leading us exactly where we need to be. This trust allows us to move forward in faith, knowing that every step we take is part of the bigger picture God is unfolding in our lives. God's timing is perfect, not because it always aligns with our immediate desires, but because it is always aligned with His perfect will for our lives. Even in the seasons of waiting, we can trust that God is working, and that when the time is right, He will reveal His plan in ways that exceed our expectations. His timing is always right, always for our good, and always part of His divine purpose for us. Trusting in this truth enables us to experience the peace and fulfillment that come from knowing that God is sovereign and that everything He does is perfectly timed. The promise of provision is one of the most comforting assurances we can hold on to in life. It speaks directly to our deepest concerns, fears, and insecurities. The need to be cared for, to be provided for in every circumstance, and to have our needs met. The promise is simple, yet profound. God is committed to provide for us. This promise isn't just about material things. It encompasses every area of our lives: spiritual, emotional, relational, and physical. God's provision extends beyond what we think we need and taps into what we truly need, even when we may not understand it. Often, in the face of uncertainty or lack, we struggle to believe that provision will come. We may feel overwhelmed by the challenges we face, questioning how we will make it through. There is no shortage of difficulties in life, whether it's financial struggles, health issues, relationship problems, or emotional burdens. But in every situation, God's promise remains unchanged. He will provide. The key is learning to trust that His provision will manifest in the right way, at the right time, and in the best possible way for us, even when it doesn't look like we expect. The promise of provision starts with the foundational truth that God is our provider. He is the creator of all things, and everything that exists is under His control. This means that whatever we need, He already knows about it and is more than capable of supplying it. God is not limited by the world's resources, and He is not restricted by the circumstances we face. His provision is abundant, and He's able to provide in ways that go far beyond our limited understanding of what is possible. When we look to God as our source, we shift our reliance from our own efforts or the world's systems and place it in the hands of the one who created everything. We are reminded in Scripture that God cares for the smallest details of our lives. Jesus spoke of God's provision in Matthew 6, saying that if God cares for the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, how much more will He care for us? This assurance is not just a comforting thought. It is a spiritual truth. The Creator of the universe knows our needs even before we ask, and He is actively working on our behalf, ensuring that we are provided for in ways that are often beyond our comprehension. We may not always understand how or when God will provide, but we can trust that He will, and that His provision will always be in line with His love and care for us. God's provision is not just for our survival, it is for our flourishing. He does not merely meet our basic needs, but goes above and beyond to ensure that we thrive in every area of our lives. His provision is abundant and overflowing. He desires for us to live with a sense of purpose, peace, and fulfillment, knowing that we are fully supported by his resources. When we trust in his provision, we step into a life of abundance, where our needs are met, not just in the physical realm, but in the emotional and spiritual areas as well. Part of the promise of provision is that God will provide in ways that align with his will for our lives. This means that his provision is not always about giving us exactly what we want in the moment, but about providing what we need to fulfill his greater plan for us. There may be times when God's provision looks different from what we envisioned or hoped for, but in those moments we must trust that he is guiding us towards something better. His provision is always intentional, always purposeful, and always for our good. Even when we cannot see the whole picture, we can trust that he is working all things together for our benefit. There are also moments when provision comes through others, through the generosity of people, through opportunities that appear out of nowhere, through the support of a community. God often works through human vessels to meet our needs. And when we recognize this, we begin to see his provision in a broader context. Sometimes our act of faith and trust opens the door for God to use others to bless us in ways we never expected. This is not only a testament to God's faithfulness, but also to his ability to orchestrate every detail of our lives in such a way that we are constantly being surrounded by his provision. In trusting God's provision, we are also called to be stewards of what he gives us. The promise of provision is not just about receiving, it's also about giving. God provides for us not only to meet our own needs, but also to be a blessing to others. As we receive his provision, we are called to pass it along, whether it's through financial generosity, sharing resources, offering encouragement, or providing support. When we live in the understanding that we are stewards of God's resources, we open the door for even greater provision in our lives. Because God knows he can trust us to manage his blessings well. The promise of provision is deeply rooted in God's character. He is not a distant God who is unaware of our struggles. He is near, intimately involved in our lives, and fully aware of every need we have. When we trust in his provision, we are essentially putting our faith in his faithfulness. He has never failed to provide for his people, and he will not start now. This promise is a reminder that we are not alone, and that no matter the circumstances, we can trust that God will provide exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. His provision is not just a momentary act, but a continual, ongoing reality for those who trust in him. When we rest in the promise of provision, we are freed from the constant worry and anxiety that come from trying to provide for ourselves. We can trust that God, in his perfect timing, will meet our needs and take care of us. This trust allows us to focus on what really matters, living out his purpose for our lives, loving others, and walking in the freedom that comes from knowing that we are fully supported by the creator of the universe. There are moments in life when we feel isolated, when the weight of the world seems too much to bear, and we begin to wonder if anyone truly understands what we're going through. These feelings of loneliness can creep into our hearts, convincing us that we are facing our struggles alone, without support or comfort. Yet the truth is, we are never truly alone. It's easy to forget in the midst of hardship, but God's presence is constant, and his commitment to be with us never wavers. No matter how dark or difficult our circumstances may seem, we are surrounded by his love, his guidance, and his unwavering support. In those times of solitude, when we feel like no one else can truly relate to our pain or fears, we often forget that God knows exactly what we are going through. He understands our struggles, our doubts, and our deepest needs. And he is always near, ready to provide comfort and peace. His presence is not dependent on our circumstances or feelings, and it's not something that disappears when we cannot sense it. Even in the moments when we feel most alone, he is there, walking alongside us, holding us close, and offering us strength in our weakness. It's important to remember that loneliness is not a sign of abandonment. In fact, it's often in our times of loneliness that we experience a deeper connection with God. When we find ourselves isolated, we are given an opportunity to lean into his presence and recognize that he is the one who truly satisfies our hearts. People may come and go in our lives, and circumstances may change, but God's love remains constant, unwavering, and everlasting. He is the one constant that we can always rely on, no matter where we are or what we are facing. Even when it seems like the world has turned its back on us, God promises never to leave us or forsake us. This promise is not just a comforting thought. It is a firm truth that we can cling to. He is always with us, in every high, in every low. In the middle of our pain, when we feel the sting of rejection or the weight of fear, God is there, offering his comfort and his peace. His love does not depend on how we feel or whether we are aware of his presence. His love is a constant, a steady anchor that holds us firm even when everything else around us feels uncertain. When we face challenges that seem insurmountable, it's easy to become consumed with the thought that we are doing it all on our own. But this is where faith plays a crucial role. Faith reminds us that we are never alone, no matter how isolated we feel. God has promised to walk with us through every storm, to provide shelter in times of trouble, and to offer wisdom when we are lost. His strength is made perfect in our weakness, and he delights in carrying us through life's most difficult moments. Even when we don't have the words to pray or the energy to move forward, God's presence is with us, comforting and strengthening us in ways we may not immediately see. The truth is that loneliness can often drive us closer to God. It may be in these moments of isolation that we are able to hear his voice more clearly, to feel his touch more deeply, and to experience his love in a way that we couldn't when we were surrounded by distractions. When we allow ourselves to be still and surrender our loneliness to him, he can fill us with a peace that surpasses all understanding. We begin to understand that his love for us is not based on our circumstances, but on his unchanging nature. His love is a refuge, a place where we can always find rest, even when the world around us feels overwhelming. We are not alone in our loneliness because we are part of a greater community of believers. The body of Christ is designed to support one another, to carry each other's burdens, and to provide encouragement and strength when we feel weak. Even if we may not always have the people around us who can fully understand our pain, we can lean on the community of faith to lift us up, pray for us, and remind us that we are not alone in our journey. God uses his people to remind us of his love and to offer tangible support in times of need. In times of loneliness, it's crucial to shift our perspective and remind ourselves of the truth that God is with us. His presence is not just a theological concept. It is a real, tangible experience that we can access at any moment. He desires to be close to us, to comfort us, and to guide us through life's challenges. His presence is a constant source of strength and hope, and it's a source of reassurance when we feel like we're walking alone. When we understand that we are never alone, it changes the way we approach life. We can move forward with confidence, knowing that God's hand is upon us, that He is guiding us, and that His love is always with us. Even in our deepest moments of despair, we can find peace in the fact that God is not distant. He is near, and He's walking with us every step of the way. We are never alone because He is always with us, always ready to help, to heal, and to provide the comfort. His presence is the ultimate reminder that no matter what we face, we do not face it alone. Faith is not a passive experience. It requires action. It's easy to say that we believe in something or trust in God's promises, but true faith is always demonstrated through what we do. Faith without action is incomplete, like a seed that remains in the ground without being watered or nurtured. When we trust God, we not only rely on His ability to fulfill His promises, but we also move forward, knowing that our actions align with His plan for our lives. Action and faith are inseparable because one strengthens the other. Our faith compels us to act, and our actions confirm our belief in what God has said. When we read about the heroes of the faith in Scripture, we see that they didn't just believe in God's promises, they acted on them. Abraham didn't just trust that God would fulfill His promise of making him the father of many nations. He took the steps of obedience, even when it meant leaving his home and venturing into the unknown. Moses didn't just believe that God would deliver the Israelites from slavery. He stood before Pharaoh with all his doubts and inadequacies and proclaimed God's message. These individuals demonstrated that real faith is active, even when the outcome is unclear. They move forward in obedience, trusting that God would fulfill His part. Action, when fueled by faith, becomes a powerful force. It propels us to step beyond our comfort zones and take risks, knowing that God is guiding us. It gives us the courage to face challenges that might seem insurmountable. When we trust in God, our actions are not driven by fear or self-reliance, but by a deep assurance that He is with us and that He will empower us to succeed. This kind of action doesn't rely on our strength, intelligence, or ability. Instead, it draws on the power of the one who called us to step out in faith in the first place. Faith is the foundation, and action is the expression of that faith. We cannot expect God to move mountains if we are unwilling to take the first step in faith. It's easy to say we trust God for a breakthrough, but if we are not willing to take the necessary steps, whether that's making a difficult decision, trusting someone, or taking a leap of faith in a new direction, our belief remains untested. Faith doesn't stay hidden, it moves us forward. It's the motivation that drives us to keep going even when things are hard, because we know that we're not doing it alone. On the other hand, action without faith can easily lead to frustration. If we act without trusting God, we can become overwhelmed by the weight of our own efforts. We might work tirelessly, striving to make things happen on our own, only to find that we lack the strength or wisdom to succeed. True action comes from a place of trust in God. When we act in faith, we tap into a supernatural power that enables us to overcome obstacles and challenges. Our actions may not always produce immediate results, but when they are aligned with God's will, we can trust that He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything for our good. Sometimes the act of faith is simply showing up. It's taking that first step in the direction that God has placed on our hearts, even when we don't have all the answers. It's the willingness to move forward, not knowing exactly where the road will lead, but knowing that God has already prepared a path for us. When we step out in faith, we allow God to direct our steps, and our actions become the means through which His will is accomplished in our lives. We see this beautifully illustrated in the story of the disciples when Jesus called them to walk on water. Peter, the bold disciple, stepped out of the boat in faith, but he didn't stay on the water because of his own strength or abilities. He stayed afloat because his faith was placed in Jesus. It was the action of stepping out that showed his trust. And it was the faith in Jesus that kept him going. But as soon as he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the storm, he began to sink. This shows that faith is not just a one-time decision, but a continuous trust in God's ability to see us through. Faith doesn't mean that we will always have the full picture or understand how everything will unfold. There will be moments of uncertainty. And sometimes our steps may feel small or insignificant, but every act of faith is significant to God. When we choose to act in faith, even when we don't see immediate results, we are participating in the unfolding of God's will. Our actions are a testimony to the world that we believe in a God who is faithful, and we trust that He is at work in our lives. Faith and action together form the bridge between where we are and where God wants to take us. Without action, faith remains dormant. Without faith, action becomes aimless. But when both are in alignment, there is no limit to what can be accomplished. The power of God moves in and through us, and the world sees the manifestation of His promises through our obedience. As we continue to act on our faith, we experience the truth of God's provision, His guidance, and His power. Our faith is not only a reflection of our trust in God, but it becomes the catalyst for His plans to unfold in our lives. In every area of life, whether it's in relationships, career, or personal growth, faith and action must work together. When we take action based on what God has promised, we are not relying on our own abilities. We are allowing God to work through us, and that is when we see the miraculous. It's the combination of trusting in God's plan and doing the work that He sets before us that produces lasting results. Our faith moves us to action, and our action is the evidence of the faith we carry within us. Through both, we experience the fullness of God's power at work in our lives. There is a peace that surpasses everything we can comprehend. A peace that doesn't rely on the circumstances around us, but transcends them. It's the kind of peace that doesn't make sense in the natural, the kind that holds us steady in the midst of turmoil, calm in the midst of chaos. This peace comes from knowing that God is in control, that no matter what happens, He is with us. And He has a plan for our lives. It's not a peace that comes from understanding every detail of life, but rather a peace that comes from trusting the one who understands it all. This peace is not about the absence of challenges or troubles. It doesn't mean that we won't face difficulty, pain, or loss. In fact, it often becomes most evident during the times when things are hardest. It's the peace that carries us through the storms of life, the kind that holds us when everything else is falling apart, when we face situations that seem impossible, when we walk through seasons of grief, disappointment, or fear. This peace becomes a deep wellspring within us that refreshes our souls, helping us endure and persevere. What makes this peace so extraordinary is that it doesn't depend on anything external. It doesn't rely on a stable job, perfect relationships, or a life free from problems. It's rooted in something far deeper, our relationship with God. When we trust Him fully, when we surrender our anxieties and fears to Him, His peace floods our hearts and minds. This peace is not about figuring everything out or having all the answers. It's about resting in the truth that God is sovereign and that He is with us every step of the way, no matter what we face. This peace that surpasses understanding is a direct result of our faith. It's a peace that comes when we choose to trust God, even when everything around us seems to be crumbling. It doesn't mean that we won't feel fear, sadness, or frustration, but it means that even in the midst of those emotions, we can experience a deep sense of calm. This peace guards our hearts and minds, protecting us from being overwhelmed by worry, doubt, and anxiety. It doesn't make sense because it isn't based on our strength or ability to control things. It's based on God's presence and His power to give us rest, even in the hardest moments. The more we lean into God and His promises, the more we experience this peace. It's not a fleeting, temporary feeling. It's a deep, abiding peace that remains even when circumstances don't change. It's not something we can create or manufacture on our own. We can't just will ourselves into peace. It comes when we choose to surrender our worries and trust God to handle what we cannot. It comes when we recognize that God is bigger than our problems and that He is more than capable of walking with us through anything we face. This peace beyond understanding also helps us to navigate the uncertainty of life. There are times when we don't know what the future holds, when we can't see the way forward, and when the road ahead is unclear. But in these moments, the peace of God anchors us. It's the kind of peace that allows us to move forward with confidence, even when we don't have all the answers. It's the peace that reassures us that God is working things out, even when we can't see it. It's the peace that reminds us that He is leading us, even in the moments when we feel lost. One of the most beautiful aspects of this peace is that it's not something we can earn or deserve. It's a gift that God freely gives to those who trust Him. No matter where we've been, no matter how many mistakes we've made, His peace is available to us. It's not based on our perfection, but on His grace. This peace comes from knowing that we are loved by God, that He is for us, and that He will never leave us. It's the peace that rests in the knowledge that regardless of what we go through, we are secure in His love and His plan for our lives. This peace doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it comes in the quiet moments, in the stillness of our hearts, when we are able to quiet the noise and listen for God's voice. Other times it comes in the midst of chaos, when we are able to stand firm because we know that God is holding us steady. It's a peace that surpasses understanding because it is not tied to the things of this world. It is not dependent on anything external. It is rooted in the eternal truth that God is with us, He loves us, and He is always working for our good. In a world that is constantly changing, where nothing seems certain and everything feels uncertain, the peace of God remains constant. It's the peace that reminds us that no matter what happens, we are never alone. It's the peace that assures us that God's love is bigger than our struggles, His power greater than our fears, and His plan more wonderful than we could ever imagine. This peace doesn't just make us feel better in the moment, it transforms us. It changes how we view the world, how we face challenges, and how we respond to difficult situations. It fills us with hope, joy, and assurance, even when everything around us seems bleak. The peace beyond understanding is the kind of peace that carries us through life, helping us to trust God in the good times and in the bad. It's the peace that flows from the deep knowledge that God is in control and He is always with us, no matter what. This peace doesn't make sense to the world, but to those who have experienced it, it's the most powerful force in the world. It's a peace that guards our hearts, restores our souls, and reminds us that no matter what we face, we are never alone, and God's presence will always be enough. The peace that surpasses understanding is a divine gift, a peace that cannot be earned or manufactured, but one that is freely given to those who trust in God's sovereignty and grace. It is not a peace that comes from the absence of challenges, but one that holds us steady even when life feels uncertain and overwhelming. This peace is rooted in the unshakable truth that God is with us, that His love never fails, and that He is working all things together for our good. When we lean into this peace, we find strength, comfort, and assurance that we are never alone, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. As we go forward, let us carry this peace with us, knowing that it is not about our circumstances changing, but about our hearts being anchored in the unchanging faithfulness of God. When the storms of life come, we will not be shaken because we have the peace of God guarding our hearts and minds. And this peace, which transcends all understanding, will be our testimony to the world that there is a God who brings calm in the chaos, hope in the despair, and light in the darkness. Embrace that peace today and let it transform not only your life, but the lives of those around you.